So welcome everyone. This is going to be a first attempt at a kind of a co-building workshop for service provision and service XML and other various ways of structuring services. We're going to get into some of the logic behind why service providers may want to choose some of these structures for their service offerings. Some of the potential values are more speculative, some of them are a bit more tangible and immediate. So I'll get into those as well, but a lot of this is within the context of various conversations that we've had individually, part of various groups that we're all part of together, trying to empower individual service providers to identify and communicate what they're good at doing and to make a living in an autonomous and interesting way, in ways that also allow for collaboration and being part of team service providers. So I can do a little screen share now and show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so this started right around a month ago when I had like a few documents kind of outlining various services that I offer as an individual within like governance and branding and a couple other things, but they weren't very well organized and I didn't have something very concrete to like point people to. And it also wasn't like machine readable as well. And so I got to thinking if there were any existing schemas or standards for structuring service provision information in a very standardized and machine readable way. And so I had Claude conduct this kind of basic scoping exercise and find some existing schemas and ontologies. And so I found a few up here that already existed. Some of these are years old already. Schemas that document kind of vocabulary and service provision that you can incorporate into a structured data. So one example here is XML. And so this kind of ends up using like an RSS type logic, but instead of syndicating content, you're communicating service offerings in a standardized way, but also without necessarily being too prescriptive about how you structure things. And so this was the initial example that Claude generated here, using some like basic information that I gave it about the kind of service packages and retainers that I would offer. And so it spat out this kind of preliminary way of structuring things that you can see lends itself to communicating a wide variety of information, such as for tiers for service offerings in different categories, and examples of previous work and testimonials and discounts. And it's all very composable. It's a very broad vocabulary that I think could lend itself to a variety of service provision. And so I took this basic kind of proposed structure and then actually developed a more elaborate service XML file. So now this is live as just my website / service XML. This is kind of a proof of concept one. A lot of these examples here are services I have offered professionally, but a lot of the copy and the details still needs to be ironed out a bit, and the prices are kind of initial points of departure, but as a proof of concept, I think this illustrates the sort of thing I'm talking about, where an individual who provides services can express and communicate the services they offer in this more or less standardized way. And how standardized it needs to be is still kind of to be determined. But this is also a very machine readable and unambiguous thing to point to. If you wanted to learn what services your peers offer. And so I think a lot of this, to get into the value adds of what this sort of thing brings with it, I think tangibly on one level, it's a useful exercise to identify your own service offerings. It's kind of a constructive way to go through and evaluate what you're good at doing, what you're kind of competitively capable of offering as a service provider, how you'd want to price it, how you'd want to structure it, what deliverables, if any there are, if you want to structure things as more of a package or a retainer, but that like retainer example here. And some of these are a bit more theoretical, and some of them have examples of previous work. Like I ran some grant rounds here, and so I have some example of explaining what a previous work kind of testimonial would look like. And again, there's some room for experimentation there. But this is like the raw XML format of it. And then, so it's not very like user friendly. Like people aren't going to be reading this directly. But this is sort of the source of truth of what an individual's service provision like offerings, the kind of catalog of service offerings would be. This is sort of a fundamental source of truth for that. But to make it more accessible to humans and not just machine readable, you can kind of turn it into more of a dashboard that's easier to navigate like this. And so this is an example of an automated kind of pipeline that reads this XML file and then creates more of a user-friendly dashboard for browsing these things that just pulls the same information listed here and creates just a simple HTML, CSS kind of gallery of tiles. And so I can show you what this looks like with just a script. So I have this test page here, and this whole site is Markdown based. It's using Quartz. And so here, over here, we have this basic page here. It's just text in the body, which shows up right here. And then I have an empty, element right here. And this is kind of a placeholder. If you use this identification system, which matches an ID that you assign to like a service category, which is the point of these IDs. I can elaborate on that soon. But if you have this little element listed anywhere on your site, you can use a script like this, that service tiles Python script, that then reads the service XML and then injects the content corresponding to this ID into the element right here. And then you'll be able to see a tile pop up on the page when you do that. So I'll run this script, and this will just be injected with a bunch of information from the XML file. Cancel this. There we go. So now all this stuff just appeared within this little service ID tag. And to see what this looks like on this site, show you this. And the idea here is that you can have documentation of services throughout your website or throughout other websites, and to keep it like automatically tethered to that source of truth without having to manually go through and update a bunch of copies. That's sort of the logic here. And right now this is all internal. Like I'm just referencing an internal XML file, but theoretically, if we had like a group website, we can have a script that goes to Andre's website and Svetlana's website and pulls stuff from their service XML files and updates the dashboards like a team service provision. And so this is what then appears on the site. It turned that kind of empty HTML elements into this tile here. And you can style it however you want, but the basic idea is that it pulls all of this information from here. All of these offerings: governance audit, governance frameworks, grants program, whatnot. All these things are listed here. Then you can also configure links to go to that page. If I click on this, it will take you to the main services dashboard on the site. So this also gets to the other primary kind of tangible benefit I mentioned Is useful as an exercise for like self-discovery or discovering one's own service offerings, but it's also useful just as a point of truth for peers and colleagues to like refer to you and your services. So now anyone can, if someone knows that I offer one of these services and they want to refer someone to me, they no longer need to like go through the process of connecting me and having me explain the service to them. They can just copy this link and share that, and it'll take them to this page. And all I need to do is make sure that I have this updated. If I'm ever offering any discounts or changing prices or rearranging the service offering in any respect, I just change this and then rerun this script, and the website is updated. That should make it easier for peers and colleagues to just refer work and clients to one another. So like if that's that, and then just the exercise of discovering one's own services, like the primary benefits that this addresses right now. But I think the more exciting stuff is still pretty speculative. And the exciting stuff, I think, is essentially like using RSS to syndicate service offerings across the network. And then also there's a potential for some kind of MCP server as well, where you can imagine if the 7 of us had each had a service XML file, we could have some kind of dashboard with a chat interface and some MCP server that's geared around reading these XML files. And we have like links to all of our individual XML files. Someone could then go to that dashboard and say, like, I'm looking for these particular design services. And like, is there anyone in this community of practice that's equipped to offer these services given this budget? And you can kind of automate a certain like secretarial role there that I think could be exciting while keeping a lot of this stuff peer to peer. And I think that's when a lot of this stuff pays off, because right now this is highly, on one level, this is highly structured, and it might seem laborious to like format all of your service offerings this way. But the payoff, the kind of speculative payoff, is what I'm describing there. With it would lend itself, by being machine readable, to be more easily syndicated and discovered across networks. But also, another thing that makes a lot of this a lot more accessible, I think, is something that a couple of my other colleagues have already started doing, where you can just take this is public, you can take this XML file and give it to Perplexity or ChatGPT, and then also give it some material or documents describing the services you offer, and just ask it to format your services as an XML file. And like that would take kind of minutes, and then it'll spit out something that will likely have a bunch of fluff in it. Like a lot of this stuff is just fluff. That's like automatically generated that I need to like prune out a little bit more and kind of refine. But it's so much easier than if I were to like start making this XML thing from scratch. It gives you a point of departure. A lot of the stuff, this way of structuring things, it seems really easy for, like, it's naturally lends itself to AI generating these things for you. And also, I think there's also a kind of a lingering question of how, or even if, we would need a standardized way of nesting all of these tags together. And I don't quite think that's necessary. I feel like so long as we're using similar terms and just using the same broad file type, we can kind of structure these things however we want. Like right now, I have this stuff structured in like 3 broad categories of governance and knowledge management and branding. That's like, that doesn't mean any other service provider needs to structure things that way. Yeah, I've got these 3 categories, and then different packages and retainers within those categories, and both of those are like offerings. Like in my case, the ontologies, like there's a provider has categories. These categories contain offerings, which can be either packages or retainers. And then each of those offerings has tiers. And those tiers have deliverables and prices. They can be discounts as well. So that's like one particular way of assembling this whole vocabulary of service provision terminology into a coherent kind of architecture for this stuff, but that, by no means is the only way to do it. So I think a lot of this stuff is also it's all markdown native as well, at least the way I'm using it, but you don't need to use it that way. Like, for me, again, the user facing or potential client facing side is a markdown page with a bunch of inline HTML that's kept updated through this script, as I showed you, but that's just like one way to make this user friendly. The actual source of truth XML here is pretty agnostic as to how it ends up being visualized in a more user friendly way. So that's the basic gist of this. We've talked a little bit about more like kind of philosophic dimensions of this, where a lot of us are active in the public goods sphere of things, where most of the funding comes from grants and like ecosystem development rounds. And if anyone here has experience applying those things or managing giving out grants, there's like a whole sphere of work that just goes into applying for grants and managing grants, and that creates a lot of work that's kind of not even related to the core work that's being done. In a certain respect, it's sort of just the overhead involved of capital allocation. And I think a lot of that can distract from the core work being done. And so one of the ideas here is to help empower individuals or teams to make money through offering services rather than creating a bunch of work that just goes into securing grants and doesn't really involve doing anything else. And grants can still be there, but I think empowering individuals to offer services could be a nice way to kind of supplement our ecosystem funding paradigm. And so, but again, that's very speculative and depends upon a lot of network effects. So you can see where if, like theoretically, if we had dozens or a couple hundred people using this same formatting for service provision, it would make it easier to say, and if it was possible to have an MCP server navigate a lot of the stuff, you can then start exploring stuff like, oh, where are the gaps in terms of the services being offered in this ecosystem or community of practice. Like, I'm interested in branding that like help me identify areas within branding that aren't already being addressed by existing service providers in this network. Or like, is there anyone who's good at project management that can like let me just focus on logo design and not as much about finding clients or like various other aspects of engagement. So I think that aspect of it will let you create packages that are intended to plug into other people's packages. But there's still a lot of open questions about how service XML files should reference other people's. I mean, it could just be a URL. I could say like this service package is like intended to complement another service package, like this service ID and someone else's service XML file. You can find a way to communicate that within this XML syntax. A lot of that stuff is still more speculative and depends on network effects and depends on people finding this useful to begin with. But yeah, like that's the basic high-level overview of a lot of this. And I also been encouraging people to bring any ideas or materials for services that they want to offer if they want to workshop anything here. So if anyone wants to give feedback on any service ideas or wants to try formatting in this way, we can do that. And if not, then I can try creating a new service offering to like demonstrate that kind of basic brainstorming process. But does anyone have any comments or questions or anything like any services they'd want to try formatting in this manner?
I really like the idea of like linking off each other's services. So like, what if you have a service and I have a complement, and we could like link those automatically together? That just like really like tingers in my brain. Yeah, otherwise I'm not too familiar with XML, but now I'm like read on the side a little bit. Would Spencer's idea be that like if I have like my like website, my portfolio website, and like there I could use those XML tags to like the standardized shape of what you've defined, so that it's all standardized across all the service providings. That is, my service doesn't have to be on like clinamantic.com, but it can be on my Svetlana.me. It's just uses on the backend uses this really beautiful, well-defined schema, and then so that it's like standardized across everyone. Is this more or less?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, for your own website, you would have Svetlana.me/services.xml, and you would.
And I would like look up like your page. I think on the very top on the code, I think I saw that like that you link that this is the XML you're using, kind of. Yeah, this one on the top, like the XML ends equals services v1. That would basically I like indicate that this is what's happening.
Exactly, and I think also this, I'm not quite sure what the NS here stands for. I think this is like a way to point to a certain schema or ontology that the following XML service is using. And I'm not quite sure. I think this might, like, this isn't a real URL, but I think it might just be a way of identifying.
Yeah, I think I suspect it is the schema. Yeah, so it technically isn't like mandatory for it to work. If we all pointed to the same schema, I think like that's nice, but we're also sort of dealing with like LLMs, so there's a lot more forgiveness and squishability. So things don't have to be like precise.
And that's good too, because I think that does save us a lot of work. Like if we had to like decide on something, on like a unified schema that can scale up for a whole like ecosystem of service providers, that would seem to like to cut us off before we can really start.
Totally.
But yeah, to Svetlana's point here, you can just you could copy this whole file and use it just as a reference, and then give some AI other documentation about like pages from your site or articles you've written or any other kind of copy or documentation you have about services you want to provide, and then just have it swap out information that's particular to me and put in information that's particular to you, whether it's your company or you as an individual. You have, you can also just put like an email here. Yeah, like all this stuff is pretty interchangeable, and to John's point, I don't think it needs to be like schematically exactly standardized, thankfully. So long as it's just using consistent terminology, I think it can probably nest it however you want. Like if you don't want to deal with tiers, you don't need to have tiers. You can like put descriptions before name. You don't need IDs necessarily. I mean, I think having some IDs is actually useful in some respect, but you don't need to follow like this 1.2 way of assigning IDs. You can convey pricing and discounts however you want. I think a lot of this stuff is very, very flexible. And the one other thing that I haven't tried out yet, but what should be possible is if an organization had a page like this where they're listing services that are like jointly offered from a group of individuals, it could just be a variation of this script, but like this script just goes internally to the XML file and then spits out all this HTML, like injects the HTML into a web page. What we could probably do was have a script like this that goes to various individuals' websites, like goes to svetlana.me/servicexml and clinamantic.com/servicexml, and then parses those individual service XML files and then like brings certain select things into a shared dashboard. I think that's like the RSS aspect of this. Only instead of syndicating like podcasts and articles, service offerings. Does anyone want to try like formatting anything or getting feedback on service offerings?
I'm kind of ready to tuck into like an attempt at it.
Sure.
What if we do like maybe 15 minutes of just like solo taking a crack at it, and then quick share outs / questions in the meantime?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Cool.
Yeah, so I share the XML file there so people can copy that and use that as a reference if they want. I'll also share this this little article if people are curious about. I mean, this kind of AI scoping document thing. Just to get some like background, I think there's a couple other alternative schemas there, and it might even be possible to, if maybe you prefer some other kind of vocabulary here. Again, I think thanks to the squishiness point that John made, I don't think there's that much need or necessity for us to be conforming to some like unified schema, but we'll see. Yeah, I like the idea of working 10 to 15 minutes on this, and if anyone has any questions, they can ask. I will also, during this time, share my screen as I demonstrate adding a new service offering to my XML as well. Anyone, so you can work on your own, or you can watch this, and then in 10, 15 minutes, we'll check in and see if anyone wants to share or ask any questions. All right.
Thank you, Spencer. I gotta go, but thank you, everyone. Oh. Yeah.
Please come on. Cool. So I'm gonna, yeah, feel free to focus on whatever it is you're doing now. I'm gonna take a crack at adding another service offering to this XML. Yeah, I'm gonna have this. Gonna have using cursor here. I'm gonna have it add another package to this XML file for the service offering for helping individuals define the service offering. So, and that, like an example would be like the deliverable would be a service XML file for the client, and a web page that renders copy and information about the services onto a web page, and maybe a script that does what this Python script does. So I'm just going to explain that very broadly in this chat here, and have it create a new package that conveys all that stuff using this existing kind of schema orientation. So I'm asking Claude 3.7. I would like you to add a new category with ID 4 to this service XML file for miscellaneous services. Then within that category, I would like you to add a package for service catalog creation, in which I help the client develop a catalog for their own service offerings. Example, deliverables would be a service XML file and a public-facing web page which renders information for those services, like how I have services.md. Does that make sense? So just created this. So it made this new package, service catalog creation, and it, I guess, made a bunch of inferences and created these like 2 tiers service offering. And so it created a bunch of fluff here. This stuff is not unreasonable. I think if I was, I could have been more specific with the prompt. Instead, take a minimal approach to specifying deliverables. But I'm also just going to manually go through this as well. But like it shows you just how easy this is. Like this already kind of gets you like 75% of the way there. And now it's just on me to make sure that this is like a compellingly worded and structured service offering. By adjusting the price and explanation of deliverables and just the general scope of this. And again, you could probably keep using AI to help you with the scoping and get you to like 85, 90% of the way there. But I do think like the last mile of this sort of effort just requires experience and communicating with peers and getting feedback from potential clients. And I think, again, to a large extent, you can have an AI assistant go out and do some like research on like some like market research. And there's probably structured, efficient ways of doing that. But I do kind of think that this, as effectively as you use AI here, it'll still just get you like 90% of the way there. But like if that just took like a couple minutes to get like 80% of the way there in terms of structuring this. And then the question of like whether or not this is a compelling service offering, just the experience will tell. But now it's out there. So this is now in the service XML file. So if I publish this, then it'll show up here at the very bottom in like a new like miscellaneous services category. And then anywhere in my website, if I add an HTML element with this ID, it'll automatically populate and then people can point to that. And now that's there, it's public facing. And I didn't have to worry really at all about the structure of this. Like in terms of the schema of this, I'm more, like, at this point, I'm more just concerned with fine tuning the scope and the price and the copy. And again, I think AI can help a lot with that, but it does kind of, again, I don't know if it can cover the last mile. But it did do a good job at understanding how this miscellaneous service category relates to the other ones. It's this description on its own. Additional professional services that span multiple domains or represent specialized offerings not covered by the other service categories. And some keywords, some of the keyword stuff, there might be an SEO aspect to this. I'm not quite sure, but that's another thing to look into. How this could be discoverable. I don't know how that works with XML. But I do know that the way Quartz works is you can add a bunch of structured data to the front matter of markdown file, and that affects SEO for the actual web page that's generated by Quartz. So on your services page, you can have some kind of a some structured data here. I think this is just like a nested YAML. I don't know. But this, I think, is what would get into SEO, but I'm not quite sure.
Thank you, Spencer. It's a great idea, and thanks for walking through it, because it's just one genre out of many. And then I think, just like John mentioned, now there can be kind of a plurality of hard API structured methods, and then there can be semantic abstractions through MCP and other methods that make it more like find me between this and that with this kind of a vibe.
Yes.
And you don't need to build that as like a database lookup. It just sort of throw it to LLMs, or look at the embeddings of the service offerings, even if they use different schema. And like, there's just so many ways, and having under the hood transformation of people's, like, what do you want to be offering? And then, okay, now we have this hypothetical service offering, and then how would you upskill to do that? Like, there's just all these ways that having the artifact helps structure this discussion, because all the real challenges are, like you said, they're in the actual trust and market and game theory of the real service offering. Otherwise, this is just like Fiverr. But then why not work with Fiverr?
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think about that, but like, if there is enough of like a data set of these XML files within a given ecosystem or industry, then you can try to identify areas that aren't being addressed, and like in more of like an aspirational or upskilling capacity, like you said, I can develop these certain branding skills that aren't being addressed within this network of service provision. Interesting.
It seems super useful, like, to just decentralized work groups in general, but like kind of especially the ones in our sphere, like, Open Civics Labs, for instance, which is just a clusterfuck of different service offerings, right, under one umbrella. Or like Super Benefit, right, where like we might be like in an engagement with some stakeholder who wants to explore various areas. It would be great to have a way where we can kind of query the network and see, okay, who's out there who can help with this, and who can I reach out to directly, right? Because the contributor engagement, finding people to work on something, headache is extreme. That's something like I'm really bad at, and it soaks up a ton of time for poor results, right? Where I would rather be able to like identify who I can just DM and ask if they're interested in working on this thing,
Yeah, especially like people that you already know and trust, and like this colleague of yours is like good at doing this thing, and like if they now have a public facing catalog that expresses that thing, it's like a much easier thing to point to. It's like it's less communicated kind of middleman overhead and trying to connect that potential client. to your peer, you can just point them to that thing and say, like, I worked with this person, I vouch for them. I think ideally it would make a lot of that stuff much easier.
Kind of feel like there's probably something untapped in here, like if we're looking at things like local knowledge gardens and stuff. There's a lot of organizations that just do like knowledge management and capacity building for like funders and nonprofit organizations, just to gather intelligence about communities and who is doing what and what resources are available. And that's like really old school, typical, like people in offices with spreadsheets kind of work. And everything is super siloed and it's really inefficient. Like from a time perspective and a resource perspective, like proliferating this type of easy method for just publishing what's on offer seems like it has more uses or beyond just our little niche, right? As folks are experimenting with decentralized tech, this is the kind of thing that could be very empowering for them because they might be spending 100K a year on this function. You never know.
Yeah, Daniel?
Yeah, I'll just add one just random thing I think is kind of relevant, was just talking with a friend about like MCP servers and kind of like a micro monetization, like different micro payment standards. There's some X402, but there are different ways to do this, or it could be some other access method. But it could be like somebody could be hosting a database and then have a RAG method available through MCP. So you could say, write me a textbook about this field with this language, with this level of math. And then it's like the compute for that might only cost 1 cent or less, but that could be offered for like 10 cents. So then some of these services could be just mega custom. Hey, I take one sculpture commission per year, and I only trade it for this. It could just be whatever, or it could be very microservice-y, and then including just like, hey, it's worth 10 cents for you to have this and curate, and just like kind of direct support for the methods, and then it just supports like a function economy. Because we're like, whoa, all of a sudden, all I have to do is just offer an MCP endpoint that does something that people want to support. Possibly over then there could either be like a drive to find the floor of that function, or there could just be like, nope, we just do it this way. So it combined. Just want to bring it up because like the MCP layer taps into what will probably be a growing nexus of that.
Yeah.
And then we can have different and choose how we want to allocate different work patterns, with which parts we want to do deep work with a commission or whatever, and which parts are just going to be like a community could host a knowledge repo, offer an MCP call. Every time I want to ping what's happening in Scenius, I pay 1 cent. But then maybe that kind of tip jar just like adds up.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad you brought up micropayments, because something else I've been wanting to look into that Denison Bertram Natali mentioned, that he made a crypto micropayments kind of wrapper for an MCP server. So like theoretically you could pay, 50 cents on some layer 2 to like use this, like access to this shared service catalog MCP server for a given community of practice. Then that can go and, it can be distributed out to people or goes into some shared treasury or whatnot. But yeah, I think a lot of that stuff, that's where I kind of think blockchain would be necessary for payments. Seems like kind of a nightmare to facilitate micropayments like that with fiat, but maybe I just don't have experience doing that.
And it's like, payments for what? It's like, it has to be a meaningful basis to engage in this. So then starting it with a small scale trust edge, because ultimately that's the hard part, and that's the live or die part of it, versus just channels for communication and schema and payment are going to be the commodity solution.
Yeah, And it could be something where, for if someone just wanted to browse a community practices shared service catalog, like that's free to do. But if they wanted to like automate some kind of queries through some kind of shared server, maybe that's what they could pay for. I mean, I definitely like the idea of having some more freely accessible tier to this stuff, but I also like the idea of microservices, as you suggest. Does anyone have any anything they'd like to share about service offerings they've been working on during this co-working time?
I can give it a go.
Cool.
Share my screen. Sorry, screen sharing is, as always, a mess. Okay, hopefully you can see things now.
Yeah.
So I started out by asking Claude, as much like I start out any task these days. And I basically took your services XML file and I'm like, can you leave just the keys, general structure of this? I don't know if that approach worked too well, so I just then went straight to like, can you interview me about filling out this file based on your article itself, which I think I linked somewhere here. So then it just asked me like, what is your offering, and like, what do you want to start filling into there? And I really thought, oh, upload older messages. There we go. I see what's going on here. Yeah, there was it. So I gave it your schema scoping, and then just like, can you create me one basic offering? So it starts asking me stuff, and we had a little issue like creating a file a few times, but basically then I just like rambled into this with Super Whisper, and I'm just like, you know, kind of this fractional founding engineer consultation kind of thing. And so then it created this file successfully. That went pretty well, which is the XML file on my site. And then I also had it just write me a convert service XML to Markdown file, much like the one you have. And then that created this this file here.
Ooh.
And the outcome. Services. Service.xml or services? I'm still not quite sure. I did services because it kind of feels
I'm on
more
the fence about that too, yeah.
yeah. But yeah, this was what came out, and I'm reasonably pleased. Like it looks nowhere near as good as yours, but it's marked down, and I don't have to do any custom CSS for it, so I'm pretty excited about that. So yeah, that's just kind of a first pass at it. I'm reasonably happy with it, and I want to add something into this like visual representation of it that says, hey, this is actually based on this XML file. So if you're a robot, go look at that. And if you're not a robot and just want to see it, like just like make sure that they both sort of like reference each other and show each other.
Oh, that's good too, yeah, because I think the way I had it, they're just kind of like isolated. There's no way to tell from looking at one that the other is necessarily.
Totally. So that's me. Yeah, love the like general shape of this, and I'm really excited to like add this to the senior services list, and then just like make those more parsable and grayable. I think that's a really interesting like next step.
Yeah, I also love the idea of just creating, I guess, space for people to find like really specific service offerings like this.
Totally.
Like we're all into so many specific things that like that overlap, but like, if you do some deep dive in this, you can help someone else address it so that they can do it as well.
Totally.
Nice. Anyone else have anything they want to share? I'm curious, John, about the top kind of schema that's referenced. Is that, I guess I still don't really understand what that does when it says the XML MS.
Yeah. So I, funny enough, yeah, I just kind of copied it from yours. So let me double check what that field actually stands for. Namespace. Interesting. When using prefixes, a namespace for the prefix must be defined. A namespace can be defined by an XMLNS attribute and the start tag an element. Namespace declaration has the following syntax. Interesting. So this actually looks like it really only applies to specific keys is like looking at these docs. So in other words, it's like saying the root XML is whatever you want, but if you could basically say for all keys in this sub element called banana, that go refer to this other file to understand the structure of them or what they do. That's my first interpretation of it so far. Let me just also ask Claude about whether we even need.
But this could also be we could theoretically we could point it to something like this. Just
I think so. I think that would be the proper, yeah. But what I'm unsure about is if we put it in the root tag, does all of it does it say all the keys in here are go look for them for the definitions, or is it let me just have thought about that.
Another thing Gabriel shared, which I thought was really cool, was kind of a higher level. Where did he share that?
Whoa. This is interesting. What Claude says is the way you do this in XML is you literally, I'm dropping in the chat, but you say, here's a service object, and the definition of the service object comes from here.
Huh.
Which is even more elegant than I thought.
So does it mean that the actual XML file can contain any elements, but those elements that are in that schema refer to the schema? So. Okay.
Yep. And then that means you could also compose them by saying you can put a bunch of different XML formats in one place.
Okay. Oh, what rather you said you suggested this?
Yeah, I think I was in the Open Civics chat. It's old news now, though.
What's something schema related for services?
But yeah, because there's already schemas existing for these things that are widely adopted on the web. That's how search results get structured and all that. So yeah, there's already stuff to grab.
There's this schema.org/service, and I'm for the one that Gabriel shared too. But yeah, I definitely agree. We shouldn't have to reinvent stuff like this.
Yeah, I mean, nice to point to something that exists when we can.
Yeah. Well, I was just talking about this recently with someone. You learn a lot about a wheel by reinventing
it. Yeah, very true.
But cool. I think that's pretty much it. Unless anyone else wanted to share anything or ask any other questions coming up on the hour. I'll share this recording as well, and any other documents that come out of this.
Sounds great. Yeah, thanks for putting together the space. It's nice to have a little container to do it and get something out. And
yeah, thanks. This is awesome.
If people like this, I'm thinking about maybe doing this every other month or something, just as a place to workshop this and see what other people are doing. So I think it's also just a cool occasion to see what other people in our ecosystem are offering service-wise.
Totally.
And it doesn't have to be so technical, but it could just be an opportunity to workshop service offerings.
Yeah, I mean, like, I almost think that there's a space here for just like a bot that's like, let me do this for you. Let me ask you questions. Here's what kind of site do you have right now? All right, put this file in the root directory, and then like here's your like nice representation of it as well. Just like really like, or like, gosh darn, like, let me see your site. I'll figure out like how it could get added to it just based on like the tags on the hosting and stuff. So I think there's interesting there that like stuff there that might make this a lot more approachable to people who like are just like, what's an XML file? I don't want to like go figure that out.
Yeah.
And yeah, stoked to be around next time too.
Yeah, that might be something we can use Harmonica for, since like if we're able to attach them direct to other files, we can kind of do that interview that you had.
Yep.
The AI just interviewed you.
Totally.
That's actually a super cool idea because I'm trying to navigate with a team like us defining our service offerings because we do a lot of work for people, but it's not structured and we don't have like defined offerings. We just do stuff for people and they give us money. So yeah, that'd be a cool experience with Harmonica, like to just kind of point all the team members at it and say, what do you think we can offer? And kind of pull that together into a common format. Super cool.
Totally, yeah. Like, and if you had any kind of like retrospectives or any other documentation covering scope of other engagements, I think that's really cool. Like what here can be like generalized, packaged into some kind of general service offering for the super benefit service catalog or something. I definitely think that like that domain AI would be great for.
Yeah, that's super cool because then it could take like, we could process because we keep a discovery scope and retrospective for every engagement we do, and then it could parse through those things and see what worked and what didn't and what people had good feedback on and that kind of stuff. Super cool.
Yeah, maybe we're gonna do some more stuff like that at the next workshop. Well, yeah. Any other last thoughts or ideas before I wrap this up? I'll share the recording link. I think Google will like email me in the next 48 hours or so with the link, and I'll share it once I get it.
No, it's great. This is just super fun to just plug in. I'm not, technical as you know, but it's just fun to see how everybody's working through this problem.
Yeah, and thankfully, I think I'll like this space. Like what I'm most excited for is the space just to workshop service offerings, not even have to worry about technical stuff. And that's when it'll get really fun.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, I'll see you guys all in our respective channels.
See you on the
Thanks,
internet.
Spencer.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Cheers.